Let's get right to our Money Power panel to itemize some of the specific ways we're all going to feel the pain if lawmakers fail to find a solution. Former Congressman Steve Bartlett, member of the Campaign to Fix the Debt's Congressional Fiscal Leadership Council and the Strategic Policy Advisor at Levick. Mattie Duppler is the Director of Budget and Regulatory Policy with Americans for Tax Reform. And Jonathan Hoenig is Chief Portfolio Manager for CapitalistPig.com and a Fox News contributor. To all of you, before I get into what we all know is painful news coming our way, Jonathan, I want to start with you with something positive. How can you make money off of these cuts that are going to, as some people say, take the economy? Where can you profit?
I think you could profit in probably what you would consider, Adam, to be an unlikely place, and that is the U.S. dollar. The fact of the matter is that there's been this scare scenario put out there that what amounts to a very tiny cut in the rate of growth of government spending is going to crash the economy. In fact, I think it's going to have just the opposite impact. I think investors who are interested in playing this trend can look at a fund like UUP. This is a fund that actually goes up as the value of the dollar goes up. And you know what? As weak as our own economy looks, at least we're taking some steps to stem that spending. That's going to help the buck, and that's where I'd put money right now.
Okay, and Jonathan, I wanted to start on a positive note because the next 8 days promise to be very negative. Let's go right to Mattie. Mattie, these cuts are going to affect everybody across a wide spectrum. We've already had threats of the USDA cutting food inspections. We know about the Department of Defense, up to 800,000 civilian employees furloughed. Where is the sensibility in any of this?
Well, the sensibility is something I think Jonathan was driving at. It's the idea that our government and the size of our government is really what the concern needs to be and the focus needs to be on if we're looking at long-term solvency, if we're looking at actually recovering from what is still a very beleaguered economic time. So the sequester is not the greatest way to cut spending. It is not the most efficient way to try to trim the size of government, but at least is a step in the right direction. And looking at these kinds of agencies, you know, you're going to hear fear-mongering from about defense, about USDA, whatever the agency is that people feel is most important to them. But the thing that people need to realize and need to be focusing on is that just because the government is spending money doesn't mean they're spending it well. And to spend more doesn't mean they're doing more. And that's something that agencies need to come to terms with the sequester coming down the pipe.
Former Congressman Steve Bartlett, you were in government. You understand spending. $85 billion in cuts. That's what they're talking about hitting us March 1st. Do you think it would be far worse? I mean, both sides of the political spectrum say this is something we can't afford. But there is an argument that says we got to cut spending. So when do you begin if we can't afford to do it? When do we start?
Well, sequestration is not the right thing to do. It's the wrong way to do it. But an even worse thing would be to continue to ignore the problem. The fact is the $1 trillion annual deficits and the burgeoning federal debt is a gargantuan problem in the long run that really needs to get reduced. So sequestration is not the right way to do it, but it's still better than doing nothing at all and continuing to see the debt.
Go ahead, Mattie.
Yeah, and Adam, I have to say, let's talk about the potential loss of jobs related to government spending. You know, a job is only good if it's a remunerative job, if it actually creates wealth. All this government spending, whether it's the FDA or the FAA or any of the industries or the agencies that could be affected, they actually don't produce wealth. The money is better spent in the private sector. That's where it belongs, and I think that's ultimately what the cuts are going to produce.
Mattie, let me ask you this, picking up on what Jonathan was just saying. We've seen cuts in other countries. Ireland, austerity, European countries with austerity. They have very high unemployment as a result of that austerity. And that's the argument that you hear some people making as to why we shouldn't do these cuts. But if you don't do these cuts, don't you make the problem even worse further down the road?
You make the problem worse, and look at what the president's proposing. It's not even that he wants to dial back a lot of this restraint. He wants to grow government on top of that. He wants to increase taxes on employers. He wants to continue to say that his way is to squeeze out people who want to create jobs and entrepreneurs and folks who are looking to get off government payrolls, and say that he wants to take money from those folks and redistribute it to people who still aren't working. You know, of course, you hear from the left a lot about how benefits will be cut, about how unemployment insurance will be cut. Well, we've been expanding these types of benefits and programs for 5 years now, and the economy is barely getting better. So at some point, folks need to look at what the current policy is and understand that that might be part of the problem, not part of the solution.
Mr. Bartlett, I asked Jonathan earlier if there's a positive to this, and I was specific about how someone might be able to invest against these cuts. I'm curious, is there a positive to the cuts? So it looks as if we're going to get them. Might Washington learn its lesson finally?
Well, I don't think I'd go quite that far, but I do think that the sequestration, following on from the fiscal cliff and following on from the debt limit a year earlier, is another motivation, another impetus for the Congress to finally, and maybe it'll happen this year, we all hope, get together and come up with a long-term fiscal discipline where you can balance the budget over the long term, do it right, do it systemically, do it thoughtfully, but to reduce spending so that spending comes in at less than the tax revenues.
Okay,
that's what needs to happen. That's what the sequestration hopefully is designed to cause Congress to do. But Congress is going to have to respond to it. And frankly, most people in Congress know that, liberals and conservatives and Republicans and Democrats. They just haven't been able to quite get there yet.
All right, so let's wrap up very quickly. Jonathan first. Worst case scenario, what's the outcome of all this?
The worst case scenario is that the spending cuts didn't go far enough. I think, Adam, many people have this turned around. The fear is that the spending cuts could cause economic collapse. What will cause the collapse is if the spending cuts don't go far enough. That's what my fear. I think what's more likely to occur is that the cuts will occur and people will realize, gee, the sky hasn't fallen, the economy hasn't collapsed. Hopefully that will pave the way for more cuts, smaller government, and greater wealth creation for all.
Congressman Bartlett, best case scenario, what happens?
Scenario is as a result of the sequestration that will eliminate some spending that is doing some good. As a result of that is that Congress will get together and pass a long-term budget that will begin to balance itself and to get us out of the fiscal cloud.
And Mattie Duppler, you get the last word. What's the reality, neither worst case or best case? But what are we going to be talking about on Monday, March 3rd?
Worst case and best case is that we're still in a position where government's spending too much money, and we need lawmakers to come to the table and actually agree that we need to get our debt and spending under control.
And I should have said Monday, March 4th. Thank you to all three of you for joining us here on Melissa Francis's program, Money. I'm sure we're going to be talking about sequestration from now until well after the deadline. We're going to shift gears right now.